Previously in part 1, I was once the world's most beautiful princess. Now, I am Nova Empire's deadliest shadow. I thought Empress Bianca had buried my past forever until the Prince Alexander whispered my forbidden name. As my secrets unravel, a dangerous game of love and power begins. With the prince drowning in blood and wine and a coup on the horizon, I must ask, is he my savior or my executioner? My blade is drawn. The real war starts now. The prince's lips were cool and soft. I couldn't help but linger for a moment longer. But in that moment, Prince Alexander turned the tables, pinning me beneath him. The scent of alcohol mingled with his pleasant, woody scent. I was powerless to resist. When I finally regained a shred of awareness, I called out to him in a panic. "Prince?" I was terrified that if this continued, I would truly lose control and try to make him mine. But just then, Prince Alexander's hand came to rest on my lower back, his thumb gently tracing the hidden scar there. A cold sweat broke out across my body. I froze, unable to move. Prince Alexander buried his face in my neck and in a low, enchanting voice called me Princess Aurelia. I was completely stunned. When did he find out who I was? Or had he known from the very beginning? My mind reeled, and all thought ceased. "Prince, since you know my identity, why did you keep me here? What reason could the noble Prince Alexander of the Nova Empire have for keeping a disgraced, disfigured princess from an enemy kingdom by his side? He must have known what a disaster it would be for him if I were discovered." The prince didn't answer. He just caressed the hidden mark on my back and whispered in my ear, "Princess Aurelia, do you resent it staying by my side like this?" That mark was a brand from when I was sold into slavery. I tried everything to cover it, but a small, faint scar remained. I laughed softly. How could I resent it? I couldn't have been happier. Even though I carried the shame of my fallen kingdom and the burden of revenge, these past few years with the prince have been the happiest of my life. "You saved my life. Aurelia is dead. There's only Bianca." I paused, then placed my hand over Prince Alexander's heart, daring for the first time to reveal my feelings. "A Bianca who wants to be by your side for the rest of her life." The prince grasped my hand, his gaze burning with a fiery intensity, yet as gentle as water. He stared at me and murmured, "Then I will protect you for the rest of your life." Prince Alexander's deep, captivating voice was like a spark that set me ablaze. Later, in the warm glow of the candlelight, I still couldn't help but ask, "Prince, when did you recognize me?" The prince held me close, nibbling my earlobe. "You should be asking me why I just so happened to be there to save you that day." I was shocked. I turned to look at him. It was true. Why was Prince Alexander in the mountains that day? I had wondered about it at first, but never gave it much thought afterward. Now that the prince brought it up, could it be that he had gone there specifically to save Princess Aurelia? Seeing that I finally understood, Prince Alexander gave me a doting kiss on the cheek and said with a smile, "I told you I liked you from the first moment I saw you. And that first moment wasn't among the wolves on a barren mountain. It was on the hunting grounds all those years ago, the moment you stole my prey and won the competition." So some connections really are written in the stars. When I woke up, it all felt like a dream. Looking at Prince Alexander lying beside me, I suddenly worried about how I would face him when he woke up. After all, he had been drinking last night. I felt I'd taken advantage of him. Just as I was wondering if I should get dressed and slip away, the prince opened his eyes, seeming to read my mind. His warm, calloused fingers gently grazed my slightly swollen lips before he leaned in to kiss me. "What are you thinking about?" he teased. "Wondering if your roguish prince will go back on his word?" Not exactly. I wasn't used to this new dynamic between us and didn't know how to respond. Prince Alexander took my chin, forcing me to look him in the eye. He dropped his playful demeanor, his voice low but powerful, striking a chord deep within my heart. "I will never break my promise to you." My brain was still foggy, and I could only manage a vague nod. As a result, Prince Alexander taught me the consequences of my distraction with his actions. By morning, I was utterly exhausted, pinned to the bed once more. A month later, my injuries finally healed. After a final checkup, the physician confirmed that I was fully recovered. The first thing I wanted to do was find the prince and tell him the good news, but I learned he had gone out early, and wasn't at the estate. Feeling a bit dejected, I started back to my rooms. But when I returned to my courtyard, I found a group of unwelcome guests waiting for me. A lavishly dressed woman, about my age, was sitting in my courtyard, surrounded by a throng of maids. When she saw me enter, she looked me over with contempt, her eyes filled with disgust. I searched my memory and finally recalled seeing a portrait of this woman in the palace files Prince Alexander had given me. She was the Nova Emperor's cousin, Lady Isabella. I instantly understood why she was here, and why she was so hostile. This lady had been infatuated with Prince Alexander since childhood. She had even asked the emperor to arrange their marriage, only to be flatly rejected by the prince. I guessed that besides her spoiled and willful nature, Prince Alexander had also refused because he didn't want the emperor's spy at his side. But since she had come looking for trouble, I couldn't just ignore her. Following protocol, I bowed to her. But she just looked down on me and gave her maid a look. Without a word, the maid stepped forward and slapped me hard across the face. She was trying to put me in my place. I clenched my fists and said nothing, but Lady Isabella clearly wasn't finished. "So you're the woman the prince brought back to the estate and has been looking after day and night?" she said impatiently. Puh. What a sight. Her maid grabbed my hair, forced me to the ground, and held a mirror in front of my face. Lady Isabella's voice was sharp and cruel. "Take a good look," she sneered. "Look at your scarred face. It's hideous. The prince is only taking pity on an ugly creature like you because he's too kind. How dare you sleep in his chambers?" Growing angrier as she spoke, Lady Isabella's eyes turned vicious. She ordered her maids to teach me a lesson, to make me understand my place. Her maids tore off my outer robe and began whipping me with rattan canes. Some of my newly healed wounds split open instantly, raw and bleeding, but the maids were experienced. Every lash landed on a place that would be hidden by my clothes. Once I was dressed again, no one would see the marks. I gritted my teeth, enduring the pain and humiliation without fighting back. In truth, even with my skills only 70 to 80% recovered, I could have easily killed every single one of them. But I couldn't. Lady Isabella had the protection of the Emperor and the Empress Dowager. I couldn't risk alerting our enemies before the prince was ready to make his move. That evening, the prince returned to the estate. Seeing that I had fully recovered, he was in high spirits and pulled me into the courtyard for a few rounds of sword practice. I showed no sign of anything being wrong and agreed. But when we sparred, the pain coursing through my body slowed my movements. I failed to dodge in time, and the prince's sword struck a spot on my chest. The blow wasn't heavy, but it landed right where the whip had torn my skin open earlier that day. The hidden wound tore open again, and the pain was so sharp I nearly dropped my sword. Prince Alexander stopped, frowning at me. "Aren't you all healed?" he asked, confused. "Even after a few months of rest, your skills shouldn't have slipped this badly." As he was speaking, his eyes narrowed and his expression turned grim. He'd noticed a large patch of blood seeping through my clothes, staining my outer robe red. He knew how much force he had used in that strike. It should never have caused this much bleeding. Without another word, Prince Alexander reached to pull open my robes and check the wound. I panicked and tried to pull away, not wanting him to find out what had happened. Besides, the bleeding was on my chest. It would be awkward if he tore my clothes open. I put a hand over my chest, but the prince clearly wasn't concerned about that. He picked me up, carried me back to the room, and laid me on the bed. Tugging at my robe, he said, "Is there any part of you I haven't seen?" His words made me blush to the tips of my ears. But the prince's face had grown dark, filled with rage. He saw the horrifying wounds. Before I could speak, the prince summoned a servant from the estate and demanded to know in detail everything that had happened that day. Seeing the prince's fury, the servant didn't dare hide a thing. He recounted the entire story of Lady Isabella's visit and what followed. Especially when he described how I had been beaten, the menacing aura emanating from the prince was enough to scare the servant half to death. He slammed his hand on the table, roaring, "Why wasn't I informed?" The servant cowered, too afraid to answer. I hesitated, then said, "I'm not sure if it was to comfort myself or to calm the prince. For the sake of the bigger picture." The prince's face was grim. Without another word to me, he left. For the next few days, he didn't come to see me. He only ordered a maid to tend to my wounds on schedule. I heard that the prince had stormed Lady Isabella's manor, thrown her into the water, and was punished by the emperor with 3 days of confinement and reflection. A few days later, when Prince Alexander returned from his confinement in the palace, he brought someone else back with him. A wandering healer from the martial underworld, one skilled in the art of disguise. The prince said this man could work miracles and give me a new face. I was surprised. Why would the prince suddenly find someone to change my face? Lady Isabella's insults from that day came to mind, and I started to overthink. Could it be, now that we were intimate, he truly found my face repulsive? Prince Alexander saw me spacing out and tapped my shoulder. "Bianca," he asked, "what are you thinking about?" "And nothing." Even though I knew the prince wasn't a fickle man, I couldn't shake my worries. The prince seemed to read my mind. He leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Don't let your imagination run wild." I learned later that during his confinement in the palace, the prince had made an unexpected discovery. The emperor already knew I hadn't died all those years ago. He had traced me to the Nova Empire and was posting wanted notices everywhere for my capture. The prince said, "Although your face is scarred and you're not easily recognized, it's better to be safe and change your appearance completely." I was ashamed of my baseless suspicions, but the news he brought also filled me with anxiety. I underwent the procedure. On the day the bandages were to be removed, I was dressed in a silk gown, standing before the prince in fine, feminine attire for the first time. When the last bandage came off, our eyes met. A look of astonishment flashed across his face. He stared at me, repeating, "Perfect. It's perfect." I didn't know if he was praising my new looks or the physician's miraculous skill that could turn decay into magic. In any case, seeing him so happy made me happy too. The prince led me to a mirror. I saw a beautiful face, completely different from my own. After that day, the prince told me not to leave the estate for a while. He said he had made other arrangements for the shadow organization. I knew he was worried that it would be dangerous for me to show my face during this sensitive time and wanted to protect me within the estate. So I obediently spent my days in the estate reading, practicing calligraphy, and grinding ink for the prince. Life was quite pleasant. But the good times were not to last. Half a month later, a detachment of imperial guards stormed the prince's estate, and my beautiful dream shattered. My identity had been exposed. Someone had reported me to the court, and that someone was Lady Isabella. After the prince publicly rebuked Lady Isabella for humiliating me, her hatred for me became bone-deep. When the wanted poster for me was made public, Lady Isabella noticed a resemblance between the portrait and my disfigured face. She bribed a maid in the prince's estate to spy on me, and through her, discovered the identifying mark on my body. Putting it all together, my unknown origins, the prince's eagerness to have my face altered, she reported her suspicions to the emperor. The emperor sent his soldiers to surround the prince's estate with one clear purpose: to arrest me. Prince Alexander stood protectively in front of me, his face like ice as he roared, "Who dares touch her?" None of the imperial guards dared to move, but the lead eunuch calmly relayed the emperor's decree. Hiding a fugitive princess from an enemy nation is a grave crime. However, considering Prince Alexander was deceived by this woman and unaware of the truth, I shall grant my pardon this one time. There will not be a second. The emperor's meaning was crystal clear. If Alexander tried to stop them, he would be admitting to treason. Alexander had endured years of humiliation, plotting in secret. He was on the verge of success. If he were charged with treason because of me, all his efforts would be for naught. I moved to step forward and surrender myself, but Alexander, in a rare show of anger, yelled at me to stand back. "I promised to protect you for life. Do you not believe me?" I believed him, of course I did. To me, he was a man of his word, his promises as good as gold, but he was destined for the throne. That was his ambition, and I couldn't let him risk it all for me. While he was distracted, I struck the back of his neck, knocking him unconscious. I stepped calmly before the guards. "You all saw it," I said. "I am the one who deceived the prince. I am the one who struck him. This has nothing to do with him. I will go with you." The guards threw me into the dungeons. I couldn't help but think that when Alexander woke, he would be furious. I had not only disobeyed him, I had dared to strike him. But as I pictured his angry face, a smile crept onto mine. He was still so handsome, even in anger. I wanted to stay by his side forever, but compared to his grand ambition, my life was nothing. Besides, this was my chance to finally meet that dog of an emperor. The emperor summoned me. It seemed I had piqued his interest. One look into his cruel, sinister eyes was all it took to fill me with disgust. He grabbed my chin, asking with amusement, "So you're the Princess Aurelia who vanished 5 years ago?" I ignored him and turned my face away. This seemed to pique his interest even more. He sized me up brazenly, clucking his tongue. "No wonder my 9th brother wanted to hide you away. You truly are a beauty." I stared at him coldly, unwilling to waste another word on him. He shackled my hands and feet and forced me to serve him in the palace, tormenting me at every turn. He had a silk gown brought to me, one as thin as a cicada's wing. After forcing me to change, he dismissed the palace attendants, excitedly dragged me to the grand hall, and bound me to one of the dragon pillars. His voice was sickeningly close. "I have 3,000 beauties in my harem, princess, yet none possess your combination of gentle charm and fiery spirit. I once intended to ask for your hand in marriage. Tsk, what a pity." Hearing him mention the past, I trembled with rage. He lunged in to kiss me, and with no way to dodge, I slammed my head hard against his. As he recoiled, I frantically worked at the ropes binding my hands behind the pillar. The emperor reeled back in pain. By the time he recovered, ready to strike me in a rage, I had already freed my hands. We were alone. Now was my chance to kill him. His death would pave the way for Alexander. Just as I was about to make my move, the sounds of fierce fighting erupted outside the palace, echoing through the sky. A palace attendant burst in, screaming that Prince Alexander was fighting his way into the palace with his army. Before the attendant could finish his sentence, an arrow pierced his heart. Clad in armor, Alexander strode in, a dark silhouette against the light from the hall's entrance. When Alexander saw my nearly transparent gown and the wounds visible beneath its torn fabric, his eyes went bloodshot. His expression turned terrifyingly dark. The emperor laughed maniacally from the side. "9th brother, such recklessness isn't like you. You could have taken the throne through more clever means. But if you kill me here today openly, you will forever be branded a traitor who murdered his own king and brother. You will never be a rightful ruler." The dog emperor wasn't wrong. I knew how much Alexander had sacrificed for his ambition. Storming the palace and openly killing the king was never his plan. But now? My worried gaze fell upon Alexander, and I only then noticed blood seeping from his forehead and arm. He seemed completely unfazed. He pointed his sword at the emperor and smirked. "Yes, I could have let you play your games a while longer. But you, with your filthy hands, dared to touch my woman." The emperor froze. A flicker of understanding crossed his face, and he lunged for me, intending to take me hostage. He had sorely underestimated my skills. Though momentarily stunned by Alexander's arrival, my reflexes took over. I twisted his arm behind his back and seized him by the throat. With the slightest pressure, I could end this tyrant's life. "But," I sighed, "Alexander, you shouldn't have come." Outside, Alexander's army was still clashing with the Imperial Guard. From the sounds of battle, they weren't gaining ground. For him to have broken through their encirclement and stormed the palace alone, I knew how dearly it must have cost him. He could have marched his army to the palace gates under the pretext of purging the court of corruption. But to storm the throne room and kill the emperor himself, that was an entirely different matter. Alexander strode toward me, leaving a trail of blood with every step. He was badly injured, yet his expression was resolute. "Where you are concerned, there is no should or should not. I never regret my choices." I gave Alexander a brilliant smile, even as I continued to back away, dragging the emperor with me. I met his gaze and said, word by word, "Then, I have no regrets either." Then, with lightning speed, I snapped the emperor's neck. In the same motion, I ripped down a heavy curtain and threw it over Alexander. While his vision was blocked, I closed the distance and struck him hard on the shoulder. As a trained assassin, my true speed and strength were far greater than he could have imagined. Wounded and caught completely off guard, my strike sent him flying from the throne room. He was wearing armor, and I had deliberately avoided any vital points. The blow would do no real harm. All that mattered was getting him out of the hall. I kicked over the ever-burning lamps, sending flames licking at the silk draperies. The Emperor, for the sake of atmosphere, had filled the hall with them. They caught in an instant. The fire roared to life, engulfing the hall. Outside, Alexander screamed my name, his voice raw with anguish. I pulled down a burning beam from the ceiling, blocking his path. I heard palace attendants rushing to put out the fire, so I deliberately shouted at the top of my lungs, "You dog Emperor! You caused the deaths of tens of thousands of my people in the Jade Empire. Today, I'll take you down with me." With that, I hurled the Emperor's body into the heart of the inferno. I knew Alexander's men would pull him to safety. Once the fire burned out, with the Emperor dead, he would have the authority to command the Imperial Guards. The story would write itself. The Emperor, infatuated with an enemy princess, had tried to force himself on her in the Great Hall. Prince Alexander, attempting to remonstrate with his brother, was injured by the treacherous princess. In her despair, the princess from the Jade Empire set fire to the hall, perishing alongside the tyrannical emperor. Prince Alexander would ascend the throne, the undisputed ruler of the Nova Empire. 1 year later, the new Grand Hall was complete. The new emperor of the Nova Empire held a magnificent coronation for his empress. Rumor had it that after ascending the throne, the new emperor brought a beautiful woman back from outside the palace. He summoned the royal astrologer, who, after observing the stars all night, proclaimed that this woman was destined to be empress and would bring great blessings to the Nova Empire. The new emperor was overjoyed and immediately declared this woman to be the fated empress of the Nova Empire. He ordered preparations for the coronation ceremony and bestowed upon her the title, Empress Bianca. The new emperor, my emperor, took my hand and led me slowly up to the throne. Wearing the phoenix crown and embroidered robes of an empress, I accepted the bows of the court officials. Perhaps fate had decreed that I should live. After setting the hall ablaze, I had stumbled upon a secret passage and escaped the palace. He settled me in a quiet estate outside the palace to recover. Half a year later, I was welcomed back to be named his empress. I asked him what trickery he'd used to make the royal astrologer utter such a blatant lie. His eyes swam with affection as he gave me a sly, fox-like grin. "How is it a lie? You are the only woman I have ever promised to protect for all of your life. And since I am destined to be emperor of the Nova Empire, are you not destined to be its empress?" I couldn't win an argument with him. But whether it was true or false no longer mattered. The most important person in my life had already given me a lifetime promise and a world of splendor.